Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. And if you're not in Arizona, you got one less hour of sleep this weekend. I think that's one of the only states. There could be more, but I was talking to Brian Blakely, Phyllis, and he's like, yeah, we don't do anything with our clocks. So, but if you did push your clocks one way or the other, welcome again here on the Cyber Call. Before we get into today's session, as people come on in, always like to do a little banter. By the way, hopefully Kelvin will join us. He's stuck in some traffic, so if not, we'll do some improvisation. Always like to talk about a few interesting headlines to get perspective, and also for you all to chime in who are joining us. First thing I want to talk about is the I guess, for lack of a better word, Phyllis, ruling decision, but the Pentagon and the Department of Defense basically kicking out Anthropic from doing business with the government, and instead chose OpenAI. My paraphrase version of what's going on, or understanding of what's going on, is Anthropic's CEO kind of put guardrails in lines in the sand that says, hey, look, we want humans to be involved when it comes to how you're going to do surveillance on people, and how weapons can take lives, and basically put an ultimatum of that: if you're going to use our stuff, that's how it's going to go. And that didn't sit too well with the DoD, Phyllis. And the first time ever, as I kind of highlighted there, and the government has basically postulated that this is a supply chain risk to the U.S. Department of Defense. Anyway, love your thoughts on this, Phyllis, with perspective, being in the government for many, many years.
Yeah, sure. So first off, it is interesting. This is the first time a U.S. company has been said to be a supply chain risk. And typically that happens after, whatever government agencies have decided that, hey, dealing with this organization has ties to perhaps a government that is targeting U.S. companies and trying to disrupt either critical infrastructure or companies for whatever political gain or something like that. So it's interesting in this case, that claim has not been made. So more to see. And I believe I saw a headline that said Anthropic is suing the DoD. I think what's also interesting is this morning I had 2 calls with 2 different people, and we talked about the use of AI. And I appreciate the idea of these guardrails. I talked with Phil Langlois from VDBIR, and he was saying, he was using AI for, tons and tons of data, let's say like millions of rows of data, and how, a few rows, maybe you'd say 90% is good and 10%, perhaps the AI kind of made a mistake, but it causes huge hallucinations, right? So a 10% seems like low error, but then on the back end, what's the impact? There's a lot of it could be huge impact. For example, if you're autonomously going to target someone, perhaps,
Interesting,
and cause actual life or death matters. So, and I talked with another person this morning and talked about, when it comes to AI, the data has to be super accurate. For example, the threat intel, he deals with a lot of startups. And I was talking about asset management, of course, near and dear to my heart. And he's like, these AI agents, when they are trying to say this is an incident or this is a threat, whatever, that asset management needs to be super accurate. Like if you have a human, they kind of look at it and say, oh, we know that's not there. We know, you know what I mean? But like when you're using that AI agent, they're going to make these assumptions that everything is correct. And so out on the back end, the result could cause, there's like a bigger gap on the back end. So it's just interesting that like I had those conversations this morning. You bring up this article and, there does need to be governance. There does need to be some controls in place as we use AI more and more.
So, John, I want to come to you, so maybe take this two ways. Let's pick up on what Phyllis was saying. You built an amazing MDR company. I would imagine you used AI, for scale in some respects. And is there some validity to that? That hey, it's not always right, and the humans do need to check some stuff when you're looking at mass amounts of threat intel and the kind of data that you guys ingested, and then also give us the NSA John perspective.
Yes, yeah. So for Blackpoint, I mean, we started an AI team years ago. So we've built our own in-house kind of LMs and everything. And I know there's a lot of talk. We want the fully autonomous SOC, which is actually something we can kind of do now. But people trust humans delivering the information, kind of overseeing it. But at the end of the day, you do have to train it. And if you train it bad, it's going to give you bad, kind of bad context and decisions. Luckily we years ago set our data models so that it was trainable because we knew this was coming. And so we've been able to train our AI models on, 6 years of human-led response ops. And now like it's insane how effective it is. And I know what's coming out next. It's going to be really good. So for us, both from development speed, all that, like you have to master it. You can't stick your head in the sand. You're going to make mistakes and it's going to make mistakes. And, if I put my NSA hat on, I would have killed to have this type of technology. Everything, when you're listening to humans and linguists are translating and things like that, a lot of times as you're developing these targets, you don't know who they are for a long time. You're trying to figure out who they are. Like AI could help with so much context on that and doing social network analysis that we had to do a lot of that manually, trying to put organizations together. If you remember like the kind of second Iraq war, the whole deck of cards for going after folks, that was no different than, I targeted the Iranian nuclear weaponization program. So we call it the physics package side. So most of these guys that we developed over the years, in the 12-day campaign were, a lot of them were taken out and some other operations, kind of starting in 2010, not by, the US, but that took years to develop. And I think it actually would have taken a short amount of time. So when I look at this Anthropic thing, like to me, just call it what it is. It's retaliatory because they didn't like something. I think the challenge is we've made tons of bad decisions as humans and struck wrong targets. I mean, there's some controversy now in a school that, we may or may not have hit. Seems like we did, but I don't know. I don't have any direct knowledge, but, AI is also going to make those mistakes. And I think the key is like, how do we train it? At least when I was in the government, there was the most strict rules around using it for any mass surveillance on Americans. Really strict. And a lot of people don't know the analysts at NSA are the ones like legally responsible for the queries they do. Right. And then there's auditors, another set of auditors. Like this is something like, there's been a lot of kind of misinformation on this. So, I think as long as those guardrails are still in place, we need to master this technology. We're going to make mistakes with it. And, but I totally understand that companies trying to put some guardrails. But at the end of the day, as the United States government for national security, we have to master this stuff and make mistakes with it. Otherwise, we're not going to press forward. Other countries.
It's interesting you said that last piece, John. Phyllis brought that up last week. I had no idea the amount of responsibility and the amount of auditing and like that the NSA did not want any type of surveillance on U.S. citizens. And Phyllis, you brought this up last week, so that's really, really interesting.
Incredibly controlled. It's incredibly controlled.
It's a big deal. The agency probably spent millions and millions of dollars on controls to make sure that analysts don't accidentally get data for U.S. citizens in the U.S. It's highly controlled.
After being on the inside and dealing with this stuff, I would say most people have these big conspiracy theories about NSA spying on Americans. Like, trust me, as an analyst, like if anything sniffs of like something in the U.S., you want to find another way because it's too much of a pain in the butt. So they should just, sleep better knowing it's not like, I think the public statements aren't really track with the reality on the ground inside. The agency has
Brian, knowing that. Oh, sorry. Good. Apologies.
And the agency does a great job on policing this.
That's awesome. So, Brian, let's go to the MSP side, knowing that, thank God, our big tech companies like Apple, Google, and others don't do any, spying with their stuff on us. So we can feel good about that.
Right.
Right. Give us your take on the MSP side of this article and what you're thinking.
Yeah, and when I look at it too, it's like one of those. It goes back to that whole argument on ethics, whose ethics should be applied, in this realm. So, here's Anthropic saying, hey, we want to apply some of our own ethics from the standpoint of put parameters up, where the government is actually saying, no, we want carte blanche. We want to apply our own ethics to this whole arena. And I think that from a MSP space and kind of filtering down is, when we look at all these AI models, whose ethics are actually being applied all the way across, and are they being opposed down to smaller, the businesses and the data that they put in and retrieve. So, I mean, I think that's just a fascinating discussion that happens all around AI.
Good. So one other thing real quick, and then we'll get on into it. I just wanted to show everybody this because this was, good for N scale. I don't know if you guys saw this, but, this is a AI data center that just has only a $14.6 billion valuation here, John, and raised another $2 billion. Now, what I find fascinating about this is again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. It just really rhymes to the early days of the internet, where data centers were, if you remember the ASP days, John, getting sick valuations, and, anything that sniffed of .com had massive valuations. And now the same thing here with AI. Now, what I like to look into also, and I'll just see if I can bring this up real quick for you all to see, is this. And that is, I look at, and I've mentioned this on stage at Write a Boom, and I'll continue to talk about this, is, where's the power coming from? And, they're saying, that they've struck strategic deals with these utilities for hydro, wind, and solar. Well, I have to tell you all that once the nuclear reactors, and there are some companies, one is called I forget the exact name, that is being able to bring on full-scale nuclear power plants for data centers in less than a year. This is going to become a really big deal because, you're going to have to not only look at operating a data center just about the GPUs and the things you're buying, but the real big expense is going to become from electricity. And that's one of the things, when I look at this, valuation of this company, and, this is going to be one of these things, right, Brian, where if somebody builds a better mousetrap, your valuation goes down really, really rapidly. So anyway, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a fascinating topic on creating power and all these kind of, I think it from even the grid standpoint of these companies, they're starting to build mini reactors. We're in Knoxville, Tennessee, so we're just right outside of our, the city is Oak Ridge, and they've got 3 companies that are building these, mini nuclear reactors. And so part of it is decentralizing the power production and put them in the hands of, private entities to do that. I mean, I think it's one of those. We actually have a data center here too, so we kind of follow the trends. And TVA is right here in town too. And I was talking to one of the TVA executives one time, and they're, it's like, how do we? It's like it's a hard argument to make that all the subscribers, is what they call them, subscribers, are to pay for a new power facility that's going to power one data center. And so there is going to have to be the privatization of power. What I do think too is, as the utilities continue to grow in their power capacities too, I think there's going to be an influx of where we're going to have with private companies producing their own power, the utilities producing their own power, that power is going to get cheap in the long run, not in the short run. But I think, I think it has to be this way. And it's also, from you guys were talking about national security. It's like we have all of our power concentrated in these centralized areas and these centralized plants. Like if one of those goes down, it can affect a very large region. And going through this, we're starting to see these smaller power facilities where we can actually distribute the load to, build resiliency into the power grid itself.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic. All right, let's get on into it. So we were going to have some talk on AI this week around SEO and AI. Our guest was, I had kind of two competing things. She got sick, so I immediately pivoted. John, thanks for joining us, because I think this is a really, really critical topic that we're going to talk about today, and that is what's going on in Iran. We all know about, obviously. But, what is lesser known, and it certainly has been in the news, of these strikes by Iran on these AWS data centers. And I wanted to talk about, one, just more on a macro level, are we even as MSPs taking into consideration, this kind of BCDR plan? Because I don't think that's in most people's, like, a drone, blowing up your your backup recovery area, and the bigger piece around data sovereignty, which is very real, by the way, because in UAE, data sovereignty is a big deal for companies in that region. And but I also wanted to have somebody on that really has firsthand knowledge, things you obviously can't talk about, but what you can in your days at the NSA, being hyper-focused on Iran, their nuclear capabilities. And so I thought, no other better guest to have on than yourself. So, John, most people know you, but those that don't, could you give a quick overview of yourself, your background? I'll turn it to Phyllis to ask a few questions.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So first off, thanks, Andrew. It's been a while. I'm glad to be back on your program. I watch it a lot. Yeah. So I'm John, and I founded Blackpoint Cyber. And obviously we're a software company and provide MDR service, among other things, to the MSP market predominantly. But before that, I spent about 12 years at the National Security Agency, and kind of also in sort of a joint role, with CIA as well. And I came out of, I know it's not called that anymore, but I came out of a unit called Tailored Access Operations. I also came out of counterproliferation. And so I spent almost my entire career targeting the Iranians, and about 7.5, almost 8 years the weaponization program of Iran. So there's two halves. There's the enrichment side, the fuel cycle side, and then there's what we'd call a physics package side, which is all the R&D and design and testing and everything that has to go into actually making the thing go boom if you have the fissile material. So that was kind of my background, and so know that well. Expected this day to come. We kicked the can as a country for a really, really long time, and I think we were kind of starting to run out of time. And I think we saw in the 12-day war, it was the start of it, or 12-day conflict, whatever you want to call it. But here we are.
Awesome, John. Well, again, thanks for joining us. Phyllis, let me turn it to you.
Yeah, sure. So, John got to work at the really fun parts of NSA, what you think of when you think of the NSA. And it's not easy to get into those offices either. It's not like, you just join and there you go. So, just wanted to give John a shout out for his technical expertise, because those people are no joke. Anyway, so obviously not a lot of folks know what it's like to be in those back rooms, looking at the intel, discussing a country's, nuclear program, whether or not they're a threat. And then, like you said, let's fast forward to today and what's happening. And so when you were at the agency, what's the moment that you realized that the stakes of this particular adversary were different from anyone else?
Yeah, it was actually when I wasn't at the agency. I was there as a govy, and then I was just so freaking poor. I was living paycheck to paycheck that I left and took another job, and I was back 7 months later. The time was when I got a call from a really, really high up senior executive that asked me to come back to work this particular target set, and I knew a lot of resources was going into it, and obviously CT counterterrorism was really high at the time. This was like right under it priority wise. So for me, I knew we had learned a lot more. Our partners we had worked with around the world have learned a lot more, and so this was becoming a problem where we didn't have a good enough picture of what was going on, nor a plan of what we do to disrupt it if needed. And so that's when I learned it was like, oh, this is a big deal. We have a problem on our hands that we have to handle and throw a lot of resources at.
Right. So a year ago, you sat down with Scott Mann, who's a Green Beret. He's seen combat up close and personal, and you talked about Iran's nuclear program. And then you were speaking in, hypotheticals about what a strike scenario might look at. And so here we are 1 year later.
Yeah.
It's happened.
I thought it was going to happen. So that's why I hopped on that podcast, actually.
So looking back, what did you get right? And then what really surprised you?
Well, here's the deal. I think, candidly, I think we should have done this a long time ago. I'm talking back like 2010. We had an incredible intel picture. I think we got right what was really going on. There was a lot of fighting in the community at the time of like, this program was halted. Was it not halted? And, at the end of the day, I think, this is all in the public domain now. You could pretty much say like when they got caught, you got to realize with a full-fledged nuclear weapons program, it's called the Ahmad program, right? So back in the day, and that was like their Manhattan project. So fuel cycle, they had a project called 110, which is to build the implosion device. And they had an uranium-based implosion system called the R265. It's all public knowledge. I'm not talking about anything that's not. And then they had a program called Project 111 to make that warhead to a Shahab 3 medium-range ballistic missile for the sole purpose of targeting Israel if they needed to. Right. So that was going on. But you have to realize at the time we had invaded Iraq. And I actually think agree with that conflict or not and the false pretenses, I actually think there was a decent chance Iran would have been a nuclear power if we didn't do it. Because when we went in, we talked about the axis of evil and we were threatening to turn right and go hit them. They freaked out. And they the word was halted the program. I think the real, so they pushed a lot of stuff underground. They pushed stuff out to universities. They kept the entire infrastructure under a guy named Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was assassinated, I think, back in 2020. He was like their Oppenheimer, for the program, kind of the lead project manager for this entire effort. And he's a general in the IRGC. So I think what was really kind of going on, big picture, is like they got spooked. If you look at this regime, it's all about regime survival. That dictates all their decisions. And so what was really going on is they pushed it underground. They were trying to work on the components of the weapon they hadn't finished. And they absolutely had a design. They absolutely had foreign help as well in getting a design. And I won't say if it was viable or not, but they were working really hard on it and had made an incredible amount of progress. So the fissile material, as you've seen in the past, year and change, became a huge hot button topic. And we did a deal with them, which I thought was the dumbest deal in the world with JPO. And all we did was allow them to increase their ballistic missile capacity. They didn't used to be very accurate. Now they're accurate. And then completely master the entire fuel cycle and have high-end domestically produced centrifuges for separating uranium. And it's kind of like the Richter scale, bad analogy maybe for earthquakes, but by the time you get to 60% enriched uranium, you're like one step away from weapons grade. And they, back when I was working the target, they didn't have enough, or they're just starting to get 1-2 bombs worth. Now they were getting into double digits bombs worth if they converted it. Now there is a lot of delay in weaponizing it. So, I think, but it was getting to the point in the past year where it was like a serious tipping point, in my opinion.
So, thanks for that. So, Iran obviously has, not obviously, but Iran definitely has a history of cyber retaliation that stretches back to 2011. So some examples are disabling U.S. financial websites, wiping data from Las Vegas Sands Casino, targeting water systems, death threats against elected officials. So when you look at that history, and of course, what just happened recently, how does this moment compare in terms of Iranian motivation to act?
Yeah, a lot of times in cyber, you think of it from a warfare standpoint, which you'd want to get as much access as you can. We call it like preparation of the environment, or preparation of the battlefield on the military side. In the fear, especially with like Russia and China, it's like deep infiltration or internet service providers, which we saw evidence of with was it Volt Typhoon or I might mess that term. I think that's what they were calling it. A big fear. That's actually the biggest cyber concern I have for the entire country here in the United States. But with the Iranians, I would say they have shown a level of technical acumen that is equivalent to like a high-end ransomware group, which is not to be understated. They have shown a desire and ability and willingness to do pretty effective distributed denial of service attacks, which, they're annoying. They take things down, but it's not the type of cyber stuff I get really nervous about that would come from Russia or China. And they've also shown the ability to, they're going to target soft things, airports, in the United States, the parts I worry about are like actually state and local governments. A lot of those networks are pretty converged and unified and pretty easy to disrupt utilities and things that way. The big power companies much harder. And so I think, the Iranians absolutely are competent, absolutely have a capability. I don't think it's anywhere even close to on par with what the United States, Russia, or China can bring to bear in the cyber world. But nonetheless, like there's a lot of soft targets. There's been reports recently of them, targeting airports and physical security, access control systems and cameras. That's a big soft underbelly we have in this country and in other countries, especially in the Middle East. I've been all over the Middle East and see lots of their facilities, and we've protected airports and all that type of stuff. Like those physical access systems give you a lot of insight into what's going on and allows you to disrupt and better target and they have Hikvision stuff all over the place, which is cake to exploit. So, I think they're absolutely active, but the Israelis, I think 3 days ago. So there's kind of two main players, and I'm overgeneralizing this, but just to make it simple, there's the IRGC has a kind of cyber warfare core, and then the MOS, which is the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, which is kind of their, kind of premier intelligence agency, has their own cyber units. And then they have a crap ton of, sympathizers around the world and other hacktivist groups and things like that. The Israelis, I think it was back in 2019, I think took out Hamas's, I might be messing this. These are Hamas or Hezbollah's cyber unit kinetically. They blew it up, but they just did that 3 days ago to the IRGC cyber unit. And a lot of the activity online went down pretty quickly after that. So, cyber works great. They're doing heavy internet restrictions, taking it down. So I'm actually kind of curious, like you have to get out to your command and control infrastructure and your redirection infrastructure to conduct those ops. And I suspect that government's in significant disarray right now, but that is like a capacity they can have that's asymmetric that they can bring to the game when they're getting their butt whipped on the battlefield.
Yeah, and you mentioned the DOS attack. So, most recently, Iranian drones also took out some AWS data centers in UAE. So 2 facilities were taken offline. A third in Bahrain was damaged. Iranian state media said that the Bahrain strike was deliberately targeted because AWS was supporting the U.S. military. And so this is the first time in history that commercial cloud infrastructure has been a direct military target. And what do you think that means now?
So, in warfare, obviously I was not in the military, so I don't want to claim to. I worked really close with all our special operations units and other folks and have a lot of experience there. It's all about information dominance, right? Yeah, you need the weaponry and the ability to get there, but it's all about really good, accurate targeting. How does that happen? That comes through connected applications, and data that we can put together. And data centers are the modern way of doing it. I do believe in this case of like Bahrain, Qatar, or not Qatar, Bahrain, UAE. Those are probably unclassified workloads, more contractor workloads, things like that. Not that there's no impact, but I think our core mission systems will be completely hosted separately from that. So in theory, it's less. But I think you saw Radome was hit. Going after our ability to see and sense and target. It's been done in every war there's ever been. It's just today it's done with data centers and satellites and radar systems and you name it. And so not surprised at all. And I think the Middle East is going to have to grapple with, we dealt with tons of the data sovereignty stuff over in the Middle East. And I'll say they apply it very loosely in real practice. It's going to be like everything has to be hosted here, but they use CrowdStrike and all goes back to the US, sort of thing. So I think the data sovereignty, briefs really well on paper until that stuff goes down. And then, man, you'd wish for continuity of operations you were hosting stuff overseas. But they're balancing this risk of what they perceive as espionage risk and continuity of operations. You look at Qatar, right? When Saudi blockaded them, they went to a huge data sovereignty push because they said if we only relied on stuff hosted outside this country, we're dead in the water. Our entire financial system won't work, you name it. So I think what's going to kind of come out of this is a much more healthy balance of data sovereignty and, kind of backup and disaster recovery in other locales around the world. Lucky the U.S. is, I think, pretty insulated. But to Brian, your power comment, I totally agree with these miniaturized nuclear reactors and power plants. Like I saw C-17 was shipping one the other day over the Middle East for the U.S. military. Like, this is technology we have to invest in and master and export to the rest of the world. Because if you look at Ukraine, their power grid is so susceptible to these attacks because you have too many eggs in one basket. We have to work to much more distributed systems. I think that's the only reason the Iranians are actually successfully launching Shaheeds right now. Their ballistic missiles have dropped because they had a very layered, decentralized command and control system in the IRGC. So a lot of stuff is kind of operating independent because, their leadership has been getting taken out nonstop. A lot of analogies here on supply chain risk and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Over to you, Andrew, as you play Kelvin.
A lot of analogies, a lot of acronyms, but John, to just kind of pick up on this AWS incident, AWS is, saying, hey, just, migrate data, in essence, deal with, your data sovereignty issues, your compliance issues later. And, I'm not so sure, local MSPs here, although I do want to get Brian's sense of this, but I don't know how many MSPs are impacted. I want this question to be more broadly to think about the guy, God forbid something does happen with your data centers, do you have a plan for that? If this were to happen, that you were dealing with, multiple, or your own data center, where now all of a sudden, this is almost like, John, your RMM in essence getting taken over. You have 100 clients in, your own data center or a data center that you do all your hosting in. Now all of a sudden that's offline. It's one thing to bring one company back online. It's another thing to bring 50, 100, 200. So how many from your perspective, are MSPs prepared for this? And love Brian's comments after, since he does have a data center. So starting with you, John.
This is a tough one to answer, to be honest, because when I came into this market, almost everything was hosted on-prem. If you look at the majority of MSPs at ransomware, they hosted most things on-prem. It felt like they can control it, but, hackers don't care about your compliance status. They care if you forgot to patch something or not, or you can steal creds and become domain admin and move around the network. So big push to the cloud. I would say for US-based MSPs and even a lot of European ones, the reality is no one's prepared for something like this. You totally can. I think we can say we are until you actually try and execute moving infrastructure. That being said, I still do think a cloud-first approach is still going to have better resiliency. At the same time, I would always say I don't think the risk is that high right now in the U.S. And the Middle East doesn't have MSPs the way we think about it. They have a lot of distributors and local IT folks that help companies. So it's a very different model over there. But never waste a good crisis, I think, is always a good opportunity to not only look at your cyber. We think cyber all the time, and we don't really think about looking at our org. Who knows so much that they're irreplaceable. If you see that, give them a high five and pay them more money, but really figure out how to add a few more people or something to offload that. So I think, both in business and cyber, I still think it's best to go cloud first. And we all say the really easy things like practice, continuity of operations, disaster recovery. almost everyone ever practices. I mean, they'll do a tabletop exercise and it's so like pie in the sky BS, but it's probably not bad to maybe run through a scenario and really try and think about like, okay, how do I keep my business running? What I need, I clearly need my accounting system, clearly need command control on the endpoints I manage. Reporting and other things can probably, you could survive without it, but I just don't waste a good crisis. Just use this one as an opportunity to kind of think through a little more. That would be my advice and kind of my comments on that.
Yeah, Brian, I loved your comments. It reminds me of literally 5 years ago. John, you were at the first Right of Boom, and one of the last sessions was Ryan Weeks. He did BCDR at scale, and he literally had the math of showing MSPs the time to bring back a few clients, then 10 clients, and then Brian, especially if some of them did have on-prem stuff, he kind of showed it was like sipping peanut butter through a straw, Gary Pica analogy.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this, dude? Is, you have, your own data center and, as you kind of think about this what if scenario.
Yeah. So it's interesting if we kind of go back to even like power, from go back to history just a little bit, like talking about what John said, like when I first started in the industry, everything was on-prem. Right. And then late, 2008, 2009, we started hosted services, which was the cloud before it was the cloud. And then, we had our own private clouds where, we were hosting all these kind of different things so people didn't have their infrastructure in it. But then that was distributed all over the place with everybody's different private clouds. And now we're starting to centralize all of our data in these different data centers, and the hyperscalers, and, we're really pushing towards Microsoft and Microsoft AD, and there's all these different benefits for doing it. And I still am, encouraged, or we're driving that way. But when you hear a story like this, all of a sudden it's like, okay, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket? And what's going to happen over time when that, as it continues to go, are those workloads distributed? Is it more of a, we have seen some cases where it's going more to a hybrid model. I can even speak from the data center standpoint that workloads just don't work in the cloud. Like they're too expensive, with just the on-ramps and, all these different things. So they've actually moved it back. Now, as an MSP, we're agnostic, frankly. We don't care where the workload is as long as it's in the right spot and it's the best for the customer. But I do think it is something, I don't know if we need to like change course, but it is fascinating to think about what happens if these large data centers just aren't there one day. What does happen? And doing the tabletop exercises, but could we ever be prepared for it? I mean, I don't know. It's a new twist to an overall problem. But what I do think is correlating it back to the power is, data is going centralized, and then what we're talking about power is distributing it. So, I think the next evolution is how do we distribute workloads in the data space throughout multiple data centers across, all over the United States. So, I mean, it's, I think it's funny. One's going this way and the other one's going the other way. And,
Yeah.
Well, I think we saw with the Okta, remember? Like, like how many applications went down? You couldn't log in because one of the West data centers for AWS went down. Clearly, they weren't distributed like they said they were. So we forget about a lot of these. Like auth is a huge one. That is like,
And I think, certain, the MSP space and all data, all companies need to start really pushing on these cloud providers on what is the solution to offloading our data someplace else in the event that one of these goes down.
It happened in the fourth quarter with the AWS outage. There were, I don't know how many I forget what the issue was, John and Brian, but there was I don't know how many SaaS applications you couldn't get to. So you do start to, pull back and go, wait a minute, what about all this redundancy? I thought, you just fell over from east to west or, something like that. But when the reality happens and you still can't log in, it makes you rethink your continuity plans.
Well, Andrew, I think a lot of that's actually like the application company.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's their platform team. Really, AWS. It's like they didn't actually build their platform right to fail over.
Yeah,
they say it, but they didn't like really do it.
It was Mike just said it was the DNS. Thank you, Mike. All right, so John, let's pivot a little here. What Brian was just talking about, really, I'm going to kind of tweak this next question to you. A lot of OT, right? I want to talk to you about Iran's capabilities. You talked about how you feel most of them, their cyber capabilities got knocked out. But, we've seen over the years, they're very good at decentralization, both in kinetic as well as cyber. They have cells and, things of that nature. Yeah. You mentioned municipalities being, great targets. Phyllis, you're very well of the SLTTs being targets. I think on the positive, John, I think there's huge opportunities for MSPs to look at OT as part of as the grid, and energy, like we're talking about, these nuclear companies come online and trying to, build out. But what is the, potential capability here of Iran just, potentially and, making a lot of havoc here with local municipalities and our OT, because our SCADA systems certainly aren't, next gen in this country for sure.
Yeah, so OT is weird. This is a topic I know a decent amount about. Like here's the challenge with OT, right? Hitting OT systems is not that hard if you can have live command and control in the network. When the Russians hit the Ukraine power grid years ago, they VPN'd over. They found the 6 or so accounts that could VPN to the OT side of the network, and then it was an unpatched Windows domain, unpatched routers. They did almost like a traditional attack on there, and they basically just went to the HMI and opened the breakers, and that's how the power outage, and they destroyed everything on the way out. So there's several ways to mess with OT systems. One is just to have command and control and turn it off. The other is actually, and we have many OT systems all over this country in every smart building. It handles water filtration. It has power. Every parking garage. We did a lot of protecting and still do of smart properties at Blackpoint. And the challenge is the stuff is really easy to hack, but you actually need to get it and buy it and test it. Like, so for example, there's a protocol called BACnet. It's basically, and then you have Modbus over TCP, which is really common in a lot of the more power side of SCADA. A lot of that stuff will take commands. They're called set points. And you can just craft packets with Netcat and make it change its configuration state. But to do OT at scale, there's so many different devices. And the real serious ones that you think about, like messing up, dams and all that, have a lot of physical backups that have nothing to do with the OT part. So it is actually pretty difficult to do damage to really large scale OT systems, and it requires an immense amount of command control. The Iranians tried this on the Saudis, and one of their kind of, I don't know if it was a gas refinery, but they were actually going to try and create like a physical outcome, but they had the wrong version of the software. And so it was a bug and it didn't work. And that came out after the forensics. So I guess my point is like the small places that have simple systems, a lot easier to disrupt. I mean, hell, ski resorts. I mean, how easy it is to mess with the lifts. You can brick them. They all have Windows 7 machines. Like, so it's everywhere, but you have to buy the stuff, get access to it, learn the protocols, test it, break things. And that loop is long. That's done in a physical location. So when bombs are dropping, I think it's a little bit more difficult. It's not that it can't happen, and it's not something that shouldn't be looked at, really, really closely. But it is harder in practice to do it, even though conceptually it's very easy if you had access to a lot of the equipment. Is probably my take on this.
All right, so let's go to another area. I want to one or two last questions, get over to Brian. Also let Brian introduce himself. I forgot to do that. John, let's switch topics. MSPs that are focused on critical infrastructure, and the DIB. Are MSPs a target here for Iran? Like, hey, if I want to get back at, the United States. I whacked a few AWS data centers. Now I'm going to target, MSPs that, protect critical infrastructure, healthcare, et cetera. Could that be an area for some of these decentralized, or sympathizing organizations?
Yes, is the answer. I think they're going to go for things like airports, hospitals, banks, financial institutions, so I think healthcare is the number one vertical for all MSPs. It's about 19-20% of the market is MSPs serve healthcare en masse. I think you could see some of that. The thing is, like, what is their scale and breadth? And if I were to focus on things, I'd probably be going after, communication nodes or transit nodes that would cause a lot of disruption in the United States, specifically airports. A lot of people don't realize how much OT is in an airport. I mean, all the bagging stuff that you do, or they scan it all, all that stuff is all OT, all of it. So, and there's two, and the part that's a little concerning to me is the reports I'm reading about them going after security cameras, because generally, and this is kind of bad design, but most large organizations will put their badge swipes, so physical security and access control cameras, and all their OT stuff on the same network segments. And then and then a lot of times, for the ease of, like, when you let someone go or you add someone, they want to add it to Active. They want to be able to remove someone in Active Directory, remove access everywhere. That's a horrible idea for those listening. If you have these types of customers, you should always bifurcate those. Just deal with a little extra work. You never want those physical security access controls tied to Active Directory, because when you get a ransomware attack or something, all of that stuff goes down at the same time. And that's what happened to Sony. That's what happened to the ports, when that big attack happened. So I think they're valid targets for sure. My question is, when I see countries going after, in our customer base over the years, and it's not very often, MSPs, they're going for down the supply chain for some that makes a part for something critical they want. We actually stopped one, and I can't say the part exactly, but it was a part on, and the Chinese came in, exploited FortiGate, right? So we got to get away from traditional firewall VPN appliances, go to zero trust remote access, but they hit that thing and they immediately enumerated the domain. We watched this, we stopped them before they got it. They found a PC named WaterJet, which is a CNC machine. So if you want to do industrial espionage 101 and you want a physical part, you go to the company down the supply chain that makes it and you steal their AutoCAD files. And then all you got to do is, now you have it tested, engineered. The Chinese are professionals at this. They do this all the time. So Iran, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. It's going to happen from the other countries. So you need to protect the same.
Cool. John, I'm going to push it over to Brian here. Brian, quick intro, and thank God, all SMBs segment their networks, as John indicated, so we don't have to worry about that.
Sure.
And they're all going to a ZTNA model, so we don't have to worry about that either, John. So with that, Brian, let me let you do a quick intro and take over the last questions here to John.
Yeah. So Brian Strong, I'm the CEO of a company called 10 Hats. We're MSP here in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been a part of 2 MSPs that have grown significantly. And, I took this company over about 5 years ago, and we've grown about 700% in the last 5 years. So it's part of it is putting in methodology of running a large MSP and a large infrastructure and bringing it to, the SMB space. So, that's kind of me. And it was funny, like when you were mentioning that, especially John, with what you're talking about with VPNs, I was like, one of my questions was, multi-threat intelligence sources, are flagging VPN appliances, firewall devices and exposed management interfaces as primary non-identified entry points, Iranian-like operations right now. So Sophos in 2026 showed firewall logs retentions defaulting to 24 hours in many deployments, which means the forensics evidence of pre-positioning is already gone by the time you start looking for it. So how should MSPs be thinking about their clients' perimeter posture, especially after this week?
Yeah, I think a been on the record for 4 years saying we got to get rid of our traditional remote access. Let's just be honest. Like all these appliances, Cisco, all these networking, they're written a long time ago, and they're going to have issues. And the problem is when you authenticate to a firewall for remote access, where do you tie that authentication to? Active Directory almost always.
Right.
Who VPNs to all the sites all the time? The domain admins.
Right.
Right. So when you pop these firewalls, like you're walking in as domain admin. And so, I think with log retention, I think it's personal opinion. And it's not throwing shade on any of these companies, but the thought of collecting to then sift through them like the traditional SIEM model, then to catch hackers too slow. I mean, that really at the end of the day is for IR teams to do, but you've already lost at that point. You're just trying to limit damage. To me, this is one reason we focus so heavily on live lateral movement. Like I want to see a privileged account anytime it's used live from one machine to another. And when we see, we stop firewall, based intrusions all the time because we can tell they're coming from the VPN segment. And we can tell there's no agent on the source because they're on a computer on the internet using those creds coming in through a tunnel. Whereas if you steal someone's creds or you exploit their browser or something, you're sitting on a computer that probably has our agent and you laterally spread to another one. And we know, source and dest. And so I think the key is, we got to get to a point where there's nothing listening, no services listening on the boundary of any network, because you're just one exploit away, whether it was Microsoft Exchange or any of these firewalls or you name it. There's been tons of these over the years. So we got to, as an industry, get away from that old school remote access. My whole thought is if you need to access something remotely, figure out how to make an image of it and host it in the cloud somewhere and get access to it that way. And if you do have to host on-prem, which a lot of dentist offices and things do, figure out the ZTNA model. I think it's a little bit safer. And then all that external vuln scanning, you don't care about it because there's nothing listening. You're only going to be scanning to see if someone messes up a config and reopens something. So to me, log retention is one thing, but you have to have the ability to detect privileged accounts being used live and then put it in context because it's either IT or it's a bad guy masquerading as. And so that's kind of our approach to handling it. And I hope that answers the question, but this is something we've dealt with for many, many years. So that's my personal opinion. Yeah. But it should be opportunity for MSPs to go upgrade a lot of this stuff, if the customers can, of course, afford it. That's the other challenge in that market.
Yeah, 100% agree. That's kind of like our thoughts too. So it's just like one of those, it's getting to ask you that kind of question is kind of validating from our standpoint. There's
a reason you grew 700%. You must be on top of your game. That's huge.
Thank you. So business continuity planning for most SMBs is built around power outages, ransomwares, and this is kind of something we're talking about, and maybe even natural disasters. Nobody's building a business continuity plan around regions going offline after a military knocks out a data center, right? Mm-hmm. So does this, and I think you answered this a little bit, but still I'm going to hear it again. It's like, what does the geopolitical awareness and business continuity plans look like? And is this as an opportunity for MSPs to create new service offerings, especially if they have, like we have some clients that are, you got facilities around the world. So it might not be the dentist office like you talk about, but we have manufacturers that have locations just all over the world. And what do we need to do about those?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes back to like take a look at your and this is actually how an intelligence officer would target an org. You're going to look at like who are the most important people that either create the data I'm looking for, have access to the data, or manipulate it, right? And when you look at a company and who's responsible for what, I mean, in the nuclear program, and then I think you can read in the news what happened to those guys that we figured out were what they did. So when you look at a company, you have to do this both for your employees, but you also have to do it for your critical workflows that are supported by IT infrastructure or applications. And you got to just really think about like, okay, if single sign-on went down, how do I get access? Right? That's a really simple one. Everyone forgets about. They just turn single sign-on and hope, but you got to think about like, how do I get access to these things? 2, where are they hosted? Is it like a hosted application? Is it a hosted VM? Right? How are we going to maybe have a backup that we can turn on that doesn't cost too much and get those workflows over. And then kind of where does my data sit? I think it's a lot easier to like distribute, kind of traditional databases and kind of the NoSQL stuff like that. There's so many services for that. I think a lot of times you got to look at those choke point applications and then just figure out. And one answer could be on-prem. We can spin up a VM on-prem. We have images and we'll get back going. Like that's always an easy backup plan for SMBs. But I think at the end of the day, and it's good business practice to look at your business writ large and look for those kind of single choke points. And also I would say, for special MSPs have been moving up market like crazy into the small, medium enterprise where now they're doing real physical security access control systems.
Right.
We've dealt with a lot of these. My advice actually is don't host that stuff on-prem. Like move that to the cloud actually, because those things are all in the Windows domain in almost every scenario. And if you get ransomware, they get smoked and it has cascading consequences. So that's an area, especially for data centers too. You really want to bifurcate those things and keep them as separate as possible because the cameras are years ago, we saw a camera system we installed, like this was back when we were probably 20 people. We installed a new camera system and we saw it SSHing outbound because we had an appliance looking at traffic. And this is like just a quick aside on application insecurity. And we noticed it just went to a funny port on their URL. And we realized like it wasn't actually real SSH. There's no encryption there. And if we just up the port, we could see everyone's cameras. And there was cameras from airports all around the world that we could have live access to and upload our firmware or do whatever. And we told the company and they fixed it eventually. But like there's so much of that type of stuff on those networks. You really got to keep them separate. A lot of that stuff's just insecure from the factory.
That's really good. So, John, you worked in the intelligent assessment of Iran's nuclear capability at the NSA. We just watched the U.S. and Israel launch strikes designed to set back that program. Yeah. We watched Iran respond by targeting cloud infrastructure. So here's the question I'd like to get an answer to. With everything you know, did the intelligence community see this specific moment, the convergence of Iran's cyber retaliation capacity and the exposure of the Western digital infrastructure? So, if so, why wasn't the commercial sector warned?
I don't think the retaliation on the cyber side's been a big deal, big picture. Personal opinion, right? I think. Like, look at it. There hasn't, not saying it can't happen. They always have a vote, right? The enemy's always got a vote in this stuff. I think big picture, it hasn't been anything more advanced or more sophisticated than a really solid ransomware group. And I think a lot of these guys actually dabble on the side and also ransomware to make money. We caught Iranians once years and years ago, and they were spying on their own people and emptying their Bitcoin accounts through employee monitoring software, but whatever. So I think, now, the physical attack, I do think there was probably some awareness. These Shahed drones are a problem. Our interceptors are way too expensive. Ukraine is probably the best in the world actually at stopping a lot of this stuff in a cost-effective way because they just didn't have. I think we've fired more Patriots already than they have had given to them in that whole 4+ year conflict with Russia. So they figured out other ways. I do think the U.S., there was a leaked, kind of intel report back in 2009, 2010 that was like, hey, this desalination plant in Saudi is responsible for 90% of the water in Saudi. And so there's been a lot of investment in the Middle East and, Bahrain, Dubai, UAE and Qatar are all like, when you see these desalination plants, they're absolutely massive. And so, when you think about water supply, just like we were talking about, miniaturized nuclear power generation systems, everything has to, as munitions and warfare and everything gets super decentralized and swarmable and cheap, we have to kind of follow in suit, but there's a big lag. So I think also it's just unclear to me how staffed like CISA and the other government agencies. There's a lot of gutting. A lot of talent ran out of the government in the past year and a half. I can't underscore that enough. Massive amounts of talent. And there isn't a great feedback loop of folks working in the government, going to the commercial world, and coming back to the government. There's always like this. There's this weird cultural thing where it's like you're out of the community, God forbid you mentioned you work there or something like that. Like, but there really needs to be a much better feedback loop because, in one hand, you have a huge advantage in the government as a cyber operator because you get to commit felonies every day that you can't do in the real world, and it's way more than pen testing, and red teaming that has a lot of rules of engagement. But on the other hand, their model of defense is actually old school, in my opinion. Very log-based, very traffic-based. It's not. We have way better cyber defense tech, in my opinion, in the commercial world than the government does. They obviously have way better offense.
John, I'm going to wrap it there, but there was a great.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
probably running
awesome.
late.
There was a great question at the end, though, about, do you feel data, just maybe yes or no, do you think, these data centers, AWS, Microsoft, the hyperscalers have arguably more money than governments. Do you think we'll see anti-drone technology at some point?
I would say probably anti-small drones. I mean, that was something like, I know Scott Mann, he's more focused when I was on his podcast, a lot more focused on kind of domestic terror threat for kind of cheap Ukraine, Russian style, like DJI drones weaponized and the ability to swarm those and not too much time commercially. I think that is absolutely like a concern from a terrorist attack type target. I think you'd probably see that type of anti-drone technology where you can, kind of break up their ability to have command control or give them bad flight data so they go into safe mode and land. For sure, could see that. I don't see data centers or anything like this having any sort of ability to stop something like a Shaheed platform. I think that is what there might be, though, is this might be a wake-up call where there's a lot tighter coordination with host country militaries and putting proper air defense systems around those because those are really hard to stop because you can fire so many of them. I mean, we can't be firing like $3 to $5 million interceptors to knock out a $20,000, half styrofoam drone with a warhead.
Yeah, fair. Awesome. Well, John, thanks a million for joining us. This was fascinating. I loved it, every moment of it, and really appreciate you.
Awesome. Appreciate the invite. It's nice to see you again.
Great seeing you, bud. Brian, thanks for co-hosting. You did awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Phyllis, always wonderful to see you. We'll see you all next Monday. Be safe and make it a great week. Take care.